Today I want to show you how to make something that I think every quilter or sewist should have. You can slap one together in an afternoon. It's super simple, very beginner friendly. You might not even have to go shopping because you likely have the supplies and odds and ends lying around your house. Although, I mean, it could be a good excuse to go thrifting if that's your thing. I'll give you a couple seconds to guess what it is down in the comment section. Over time, your ironing board cover is going to get stained. It's just a matter of time, and the process is even faster if you use starch and best press regularly like I do. I mean, look at the staining on mine. This happened even with frequent washes after every application. And I mean, on top of that, mistakes happen. You might accidentally burn or scorch your cover. Or if you're like my mom, you might even find that a fabric transfer works a little too well and it ends up going through your project and permanently marking your ironing board cover. So today I'm going to show you how to cobble together a new one using scraps and bits and pieces. For this project you're going to need wrapping paper, leftover single fold binding, you'll need some kind of measuring device, any ruler will do. You'll also need something to mark your pattern out, a pin or some kind of marker. You'll need paper scissors, fabric scissors or a rotary cutter, some pins, some elastic, safety pins. Okay, let's talk fabric. It needs to be cotton. Don't use polyester or wool or anything weird like that. It needs to be cotton. It holds up the best to the heat of the iron. So I recommend an old pillowcase, that's what I made my first one out of, or a length of Quilter's cotton. This is actually from a bolt of extra wide, and it was a little bit of backing that I didn't end up needing, and I've had sitting around in my stash for a while. If you're going to use a pillowcase, there are a couple things to consider. Okay, so you want to pay attention to how it was constructed. So for instance, this pillowcase, let's open it up. So it's sewn along the side like that, and then along the bottom. So if you open this up, you're going to have an extra wide piece of fabric, not an extra long piece of fabric. This pillowcase, on the other hand, open it up, is constructed differently. So it's sewn up the sides, and it doesn't have a seam on the bottom. Okay, so when you pick out these seams, you're going to have one nice long piece of fabric. If once you've picked out your seams, you find that your fabric still isn't long enough, you can always pick out the seam here too and give yourself another good couple inches to work with. I also recommend that you go with a darker color because it won't show the staining quite as quickly as these lighter colors would. Whichever fabric you end up using, just keep in mind that you want enough fabric to go over the edges of your ironing board and under. So you probably want several inches on all sides. So you can see here that the piece of fabric I'm going to use doesn't quite go over either end. It just isn't quite enough. I'm going to go ahead and sew on the excess fabric on either side of this piece of fabric so that I don't end up with any seams in any area where I actually do my pressing. So I wouldn't want a big old seam down the middle this way or a big long seam going this way. But if I put them on the very end, I'm never going to see them. I'm never going to iron in this tiny little scrap of ironing board. So I should be safe. At this point, I just like to remind you that the goal here is for a usable ironing board cover, not a perfect one. So when I'm making a project like this, I use the make it work philosophy, which means things might be wonky because I'm flying by the seat of my pants. Okay, so first things first, you need to make a pattern. So grab your wrapping paper, your measuring tool, and whatever you're going to mark with. Whoops. And also your ironing board. My ironing board is upside down on top of my wrapping paper, and then I just grabbed a couple things that were laying around to hold the corners down so the paper doesn't roll back up. Now there are several ways that you could mark your pattern, but for this video I'll just show you how I did it, how it worked for me. There's never just one way to do something, so get creative, do what feels right for you, and maybe leave a comment in the description below for other people. You can leave little tips and hints for them. Before I start marking out my pattern, I need to figure out how wide the frame is this way and then how far I want my fabric to extend when it's folded under the ironing board. So I'm going to use my little ruler, and that's about 1 inch there, and maybe I want maybe 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go with 2.5 inches all around my weird ironing board shape. And that's going to include my seam allowance. I don't mind if I lose 1/4 inch from that. And that's my seam allowance. If you're going to do a bigger seam allowance, then make sure and add that on. Okay, so a really good way to save time here is to scoot one of your edges over to the straight edge of the wrapping paper. So I know I need 2.5 inches. Here's 2.5, and I can scoot it over here. And now I don't need to measure or cut this side. I'm just going to make sure it butts up there, and then move my ruler down and make sure that it's 2.5 inches all the way down. Okay, and remember, we're looking for functional, not perfect. So I'm going to move my ruler along, marking my little 2.5 dashes as I go. And I find that with curves, you want to make these dashes closer together, but when you're working on a straight edge, so we worked through this little curve, now I have a good straight edge here. I'm going to make my dashes a little farther away from each other. Okay, now that I've gotten back to this edge, I'm going to start marking much closer. So just scoot it a little bit. And I'm trying to keep the middle part of this ruler touching what I'm touching the ironing board. Okay, 2.5, 2.5, trying to keep the middle touching. Maybe that was too big of a gap. How about here? 2.5. So you'll see here is one of my straight side dashes, and then here's my curved dashes. And it's really giving a good idea of that curve. So I would continue along on the other side, doing the tight curve here, then I have straight, then I have another curve here, a nice long side, and then some gradual curves. Then after you have marked everything, you're going to go and connect the dots basically, like so. And it doesn't have to be neat. And in fact, you don't necessarily have to do it with your pin. You could probably do it pretty easily with your scissors. Okay, so that would be a straighter line. But I'm not actually going to cut this one out because I still have my original pattern. So keep yours. You only have to do this once if you're careful, and then you can make a bunch. Also, this one had a grid on the back, which was really helpful. I would highly recommend gridded paper if you can manage it. So when you're done with this, go ahead and cut out your pattern using your paper scissors. I'm going to take a little moment to press my fabric just to get out some of these harsher folds and wrinkles. It doesn't have to be perfectly flat, but I don't want my pattern to be distorted because of these big, deep hills and valleys. And this is what it looks like when you put your pattern on top of your fabric. And then I pin at strategic points. So anywhere I have a curve or a long straight edge, and then you see this curve is pointier, so I use pins closer together right there. And I did that around the whole pattern. If you have the right setup, you could use pattern weights instead of pins, and then you could cut out with a rotary cutter on your cutting mat. But I don't have a big enough cutting mat to make that an easy thing to do. So I'm already down here on the floor, so I'm just going to take out my fabric scissors and cut all the way around the perimeter of my pattern. Okay, here is my pattern piece cut out, and frankly, it's not perfect. I mean, I get really annoyed when I cut things out by hand. I start getting really impatient, and then things just sort of get messy. Okay, I would say at this point that we are about halfway done, unless you don't have leftover binding, in which case you need to make a bunch of it. And I can't give you an exact measurement because I think everyone's ironing board will be like a little bit different. What I do is I get into my leftover binding stash and then I just keep joining them up until I have enough to go around the whole thing. Nobody's going to see this. It's going to be underneath your ironing board, so it doesn't matter if they're mismatched or anything. And in fact, I think I've done 2 different sized bindings together. Both of these are about 2.5-inch single fold binding, and I will find my lead end. This is where I'm going to start. And I'm going to find the long straight edge of the ironing board. So this is the wide end. The narrow end is up there. I'm going to find someplace sort of in the middle here. And for my starting piece, I'm going to fold this under, give it a finger press like this, and then I will attach it to the side with a 1/4-inch seam allowance. And I'm not going to pin or anything. I'm going to leave these alone, and I'm just going to match it up as I go around. Now, I will admit that it is easier to put binding around curves if you're using a bias binding, but it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be functional. So just go slowly, stop a lot to rearrange, and you can work this binding around the edge. And it doesn't matter if there are little pleats or bubbles or anything weird. And the same thing goes for up here at the narrower end. You'll just go slowly. It's not a super narrow point, so you just go slowly, align as you go. I mean, you could pin if you're more comfortable doing that, but it is definitely going to work. Will it necessarily be pretty? Who knows? But it will work. And just remember, for your pattern piece, you want the right side up for this first pass. So here is what it's looking like now. Got the raw edges. We've got our flappy doodah. And then where do they meet up? Let's find it. Here's where the 2 binding strips meet up. And you can see this one is shorter than the blue one. But before I got to the end here, I cut off, left a little extra, folded it under so that these edges aren't raw. And then I finished sewing and I did a couple back stitches here to make it really sturdy. So at this point you could stop and you could feed your elastic through this tube, but I like to hide these raw edges. So what I did with my first ironing board cover was I pressed this seam here and then I folded it over like so, and then I sewed all of the binding down on this other side, and then that's what I put my elastic through here. So option 1, raw edges, feed your elastic this way. And then option 2, a little bit more work, a little bit more pressing, and then the elastic will be fed through there instead of through this open end. So it's up to you. So this is what it looks like if you don't make that extra step. And then here is my original ironing board cover, and that is what it will look like. And in my case, it did not turn out neat, but again, it ends up underneath. No one ever sees it. Look, very messy, but it works, okay? So you choose. It's up to you how you want to finish this off. Okay, so at this point, I have secured all of my binding all around the perimeter of my ironing board cover piece. There is a bit of mess here and there, some impromptu pleats and tucks, but it is ready to go. I'm ready to add some elastic. If you don't have a big old spool of leftover elastic like this, you're probably wondering how much you're going to need. And I can't tell you an exact number, but I can tell you how to figure it out. Okay, so here is some leftover yarn. What you want to do is match up your thread to the channel that you have sewn and go all along the perimeter, stopping and gripping so nothing moves as you move around. So note where you start and then go around the whole perimeter. And when you get back to where you started, cut that string. So I haven't gone nearly close to around the perimeter. This is just a little demo. Cut that string. It'll be pretty long, and the easiest way to measure it would be to double it up a couple times, measure that shorter length, and then multiply by however many strands there are. So I doubled it up twice, so I have 4 strands, so I would multiply my measurement by 4. So that's how much elastic you would need maximum, but really when you put the elastic in, you're going to need a little less than that because you want it to stretch and then contract when it goes around your board. Okay, so we are finally in the home stretch. I just need to get this binding in the casing. The most common way to do that is with a safety pin. There are a lot of specialty tools that you might pick up. You might even have them in your sewing room. You could also use a purple thing. You could thread your elastic through here and then use this sort of as a needle to get it through. But I'll use a safety pin for this demonstration. Now, if you aren't using a big old thing like this and you do have raw edges or raw ends on both sides of your elastic, you might want to pin your end to your project so that it doesn't get sucked in and then get lost and you have to start all over again. So secure the end. But this will act as a pretty good anchor, so I don't need to worry about that. So I'm just going to feed it through here, scrunch, pull, scrunch, pull, scrunch, pull. And this is probably my least favorite part of this project just because I'm a little impatient. But it's pretty easy. Just stick with it. Maybe put on some music. Try not to open your safety pin in here. You could listen to an audiobook. So anything that'll make it feel like it is going by faster. So here is the safety pin. It's come out the other side. And if at this point you have sort of like a crumpled up mess, congratulations, you're doing it right. You can see there's like no scrunch happening here, but there's a ton over here. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to tighten this or anything yet. I'm just going to secure my other end, and then I'm going to secure that right here to my fabric so that it doesn't get lost in the middle somewhere. And then I'm going to redistribute all of the crinkle so it goes around the whole thing. And it might take a minute and a bit of fussing. Now that the gathering is a little bit more even, and still not perfect, but a little bit more even, I'm going to take it to my ironing board and do a fit. So I want to see if it's too tight, if it's too loose, and then I'm going to make my adjustments with this here. So I will either pull more elastic out or I'm going to pull more elastic in. It's a real balancing act here. You don't want it too tight to make it hard to get over your board, and you don't want it so loose that it doesn't hold onto the board well enough. So if you look right here, you can see that it's sort of flapping down a little bit. I want it to pull more up this way, so I'm going to tighten my elastic. If it was really hard to get it on your board, that means you need to add more elastic in so it has a little bit more to stretch. It took a couple tries, but I got it to the stretchiness that I like. So now I need to secure these ends together. And this can be a little tricky because you don't want to unpin this and then have it shoot down through here and then start all over again. So what you're going to do is you're going to gather these together, pin them, take them to your sewing machine, and then sew back and forth, not just here, but like up and down a little bit so that you get a really nice, sturdy seam. I really think this part is the trickiest part. Don't lose your progress. Don't let it get sucked in. Here is what it looks like now. It is not pretty, but it's secure. And I stopped about here because it started trying to get pulled under into my machine. So I'm just going to leave it like that. I'm going to unpin it, and it's going to disappear inside there. And here is the finished cover. It didn't look perfect while I was making it. There's a lot of mistakes and little messy bits, but when it's on the ironing board, you can't see them. They're all tucked underneath, out of sight. No one will ever know. I mean, even up here where I have a little seam because I had to add some more fabric on, it looks sort of like a finished detail and not like an improvised addition. So I would call this one a success. Although, if you watch my videos regularly, you might not ever see this cover again because I don't know how well blocks will show up on top of this color with all the busyness. So, maybe, maybe not. I might need to make another one. Thanks for spending time with me today, quilters. If you want to support this channel and help me buy supplies and materials for future videos, please visit my Buy Me a Coffee page linked in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss upcoming videos. And I'll see you again real soon. Bye!